All right, let's dive in. Today, we're exploring a different side of H.P. Lovecraft's. I know Lovecraft and humor, right? It sounds a bit odd, but stick with me because we'll be looking at his short story, The Alchemist. And, well, let's just say you might see Lovecraft in a whole new light after this deep dive.
Yeah, it's funny how we tend to box authors in, especially someone like Lovecraft. Cosmic horror is his thing, everyone knows that. But
Yeah.
The Alchemist, well, it gives us a glimpse into something else, a different side of his writing, And it plays with these Gothic conventions in a way that is unsettling, but also kind of funny.
So let's back up a bit before we get into the humor. Can you give us a quick summary of The Alchemist? What's it all about?
Okay, picture this. A crumbling, isolated castle, way up on a hill. Inside, there's this alchemist, and he's cursed, right? This curse has been passed down for generations. Each heir has to keep searching for some forbidden knowledge. But here's the thing. They all meet pretty bad ends while they're searching.
Okay, so we've got classic Lovecraft elements here. Creepy atmosphere, doomed characters, family secrets, the whole nine yards. But where does the humor fit into all this? It doesn't exactly sound like a barrel of laughs.
See, that's the interesting part. It's not like in-your-face humor, not slapstick. It's more subtle, almost subversive. It comes from the way Lovecraft plays with what we expect to happen. Like, take the curse, for example. He never actually comes out and says what'll happen if the alchemist fails. It's just this vague threat of doom hanging over everything. And each generation, they all interpret the threat differently. Their fears and superstitions just make the whole thing more and more outlandish.
So it's kind of like a really messed up game of telephone.
Yeah.
The curse gets more and more absurd each time it gets passed on.
Exactly. It's like Lovecraft is showing us how myths evolve. They get exaggerated over time, often to the point of being ridiculous. We were talking about Wikipedia earlier. Well, their definition of myth-making is basically that it's constantly evolving. And The Alchemist feels like a perfect example of this.
So he's not just trying to scare us. He's making a commentary on how we create and pass on these stories, even if they become, well, kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, you got it. And that's where the humor comes in. It's like Lovecraft is winking at us, the readers, saying, look how humans tend to blow things out of proportion.
I love that. So we had the evolving curse, this creepy castle, and an alchemist who just can't escape his family's past. What else should we be looking for when we try to find Lovecraft's humor?
Well, pay attention to the names. Lovecraft's characters often have these incredibly old-fashioned names, almost comical. They add to the sense that it's all a bit of a caricature, like he's making fun of the whole Gothic genre.
Yeah, I can totally see that, like these dramatic, larger-than-life characters with these ridiculous names.
Exactly. The main character in The Alchemist is named Count Albertus de Manius and his castle. It's called, get this, the Chateau of the Black Valley.
Oh, wow, yeah. Those names are a bit much. They do sound both grand and a little silly at the same time.
Right, that's exactly what makes them funny. It's as if Lovecraft is deliberately going over the top, pushing these Gothic tropes to the limit, and letting us laugh at how absurd it all is.
So he's playing with our expectations on a lot of levels. The setting, the characters, even the curse itself. It's all heightened, exaggerated to a point where it's both scary and funny.
Yeah, you got it. I think that's what makes The Alchemist such a fascinating story to read. It challenges our ideas about what a Lovecraft story should be. It's still dark and atmospheric, but there's this undercurrent of humor that adds another whole layer to the experience.
I'm totally intrigued now. We've talked about these bigger picture things, the curse, the setting, those character names. But I'm curious, does this humor pop up in the way he describes things that actually happen in the story? Are there specific scenes or passages where it really comes through?
Oh, absolutely. Remember we were talking about how Lovecraft never really describes those gruesome deaths? Well, that's a big part of his humor right there. He builds it all up, all this anticipation, and you just want to know what happened, but then nothing.
Yeah. It's like he's leading you right to the edge and then stops you from looking over.
Exactly. And it's even funnier when you think about it, right? These deaths, they're supposed to be horrible, the terrifying result of this curse, But by not describing them, he kind of takes away the horror. It's almost like it's almost comical.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like he's saying these deaths, they're so awful, you can't even imagine. But it ends up feeling more like, I'm not even going to try to scare you with all the gory details.
Yes. It's that twist, You expect one thing and get another. That's what makes it funny. It's a subtle humor, very Lovecraft, but it's definitely there.
And that brings us back to myth making, doesn't it? I mean, myths, they really thrive on what's not said, what's left unseen. The vaguer and more mysterious something as well, the more our imaginations just go wild.
Exactly. And Lovecraft, he was a master of atmosphere. He knew how to use suggestion, He knew that by not saying things, he could make them even scarier. Or, in this case, funnier.
So he's kind of flipping the script on how horror usually works. Instead of trying to scare you with descriptions, he's using this power of suggestion, what's not said, to get a whole bunch of emotions out of you. And one of those is, surprisingly, laughter.
You got it. It's a really clever technique, really. And it's one of the things that makes The Alchemist such a unique story, something that makes you think.
Okay, I'm starting to get how it all fits together. We've got those over-the-top names, that vague curse that just keeps changing, the way he doesn't describe those awful deaths. What else in the story adds to this sense of humor?
Well, think about the alchemist's goal. He's obsessed with finding this forbidden knowledge, right? But we never find out what it is. It's just this idea that drives him crazy, drives him to his death, but it's never explained.
That's true. He's risking everything for some idea, but we have no clue what it is or why it matters so much.
And that's part of the humor. Here's this guy who could lose everything for this abstract thing, this concept, chasing after something nobody can even define. It's almost like he's chasing the wind.
Yeah, I can see how that's funny. He's so driven, so focused, but what he wants is totally undefined. It's like a parody of that classic mad scientist trope, you know?
Exactly. And it goes back to myth-making again, right? Myths often have these powerful forces that nobody can really explain. It seems like Lovecraft is playing around with that idea here, using it to be both scary and funny at the same time.
So to sum up, we've got these outrageous names, this vague curse that keeps evolving, these deaths that we never actually see, and this forbidden knowledge that drives our main character to ruin. It's almost like Lovecraft took every classic horror element and then added this big dose of absurdity to it.
You got it. And it's that mix of horror and absurdity, the scary and the funny, that makes The Alchemist so interesting. It messes with what you expect, makes you think, and yeah, it even makes you laugh. Well, maybe a little nervously in that classic Lovecraft way.
I like that. It seems like Lovecraft wants us to not just read the story, but to really think about it. To question the usual horror stuff and find humor in these really dark places.
Exactly. And that's what makes digging into this stuff so rewarding, right? We're not just retelling a story, we're finding this whole other layer of meaning, something people often miss, about Lovecraft's genius.
Okay, so we've talked about how The Alchemist shows this humorous side of Lovecraft's writing. But is there more to it? Does this humor connect to any bigger themes or ideas he explores in his other work?
That's a great question. One thing that strikes me is how Lovecraft uses humor to show how foolish human ambition can be. The Alchemist, he's driven by this need for forbidden knowledge, and it destroys him. It's a warning, but it's also kind of funny.
Oh, that's interesting. So the humor isn't just a way to deal with the darkness, it's saying something about what it means to be human.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Lovecraft is saying, look at this guy. He's so focused on his ambition that he doesn't see the danger right there. And there's something funny about that kind of pride, that ambition that just leads to someone's downfall.
It reminds me of those Greek tragedies, the hero's big flaw is always pride or ambition. But Lovecraft doesn't present it all seriously. He adds this humor to it.
Yes. And I think that's what makes it work so well. You see the tragedy, the horror, but you also see how ridiculous it all is.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. We started talking about Lovecraft's humor, and now we've gotten into myth-making, psychology, all this stuff. It's amazing how much depth there is in a story like The Alchemist.
Absolutely. It shows you that there's always something new to discover in Lovecraft's writing, even in his less famous stories.
Yeah, I agree. So to anyone listening, if you're new to Lovecraft or you just know his cosmic horror stuff, I really recommend checking out The Alchemist. You might be surprised.
It's a short story, but it's worth it. It might even change how you think about Lovecraft and how humor can work even in the darkest stories.
I think that's a great place to wrap things up. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the unexpected humor of H.P. Lovecraft. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep finding those hidden layers of meaning in the stories you love.
It's funny, one thing that sticks out to me about The Alchemist is how Lovecraft uses humor to show how messed up human ambition can be. The Alchemist, he's so thirsty for this forbidden knowledge and then ends up destroying him. It's like a warning, but it's also kind of funny.
Huh. That is interesting. So you're saying the humor isn't just a way to deal with the darkness, but it's also like a commentary on being human.
Exactly. It's like Lovecraft is saying, look at this guy, so blinded by what he wants that he can't even see the danger. There's just something inherently funny about that kind of pride, that ambition that leads to, someone's downfall.
It's almost like those old Greek tragedies, right?
Yeah.
Where the hero's fatal flaw is always their pride or ambition. But Lovecraft throws in humor instead of being all serious and dramatic.
Yes. And that's what makes it so effective, I think. You can see the tragedy, the horror, but also you see how ridiculous the whole thing is.
This deep dive has been fascinating. We started talking about Lovecraft's humor, and now we've gone through myth-making, psychology, and even the dangers of ambition. It's amazing how much depth a story like The Alchemist has.
Absolutely. It just shows you there's always more to find in Lovecraft's work, even in his lesser-known stories. There's always something new to discover.
I totally agree. So to all our listeners, if you haven't read much Lovecraft, or maybe you just know his cosmic horror stuff, you should really check out The Alchemist. It might surprise you.
Yeah, it's a short story, but it packs a punch. And it just might change how you think about Lovecraft, maybe even change how you see humor in these really dark stories.
That's a great way to end things. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive into H.P. Lovecraft's surprising sense of humor. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep finding those hidden meanings in the stories you love.